How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I guess we are Sara Robinson and Bill Beutler. Is that how you pronounce it?
Right. Bill Beutler, William Beutler or Bill Beutler, those are both correct.
Okay, and I'm Sara Robinson. I'm standing in today for Bill Scher, who couldn't be here today. Bill is a fellow of mine at the Campaign for America's Future.
And I am filling in for Con Carroll, who usually fills the right-hand side of the weekend blog. I work for New Media Strategies as a strategic marketing or strategic consulting and online marketing firm. And Con Carroll and I both used to write the blogometer for National Journal's Hotline, but we did so at different times.
Okay.
So
anyway,
yes, go ahead.
We had a nice little outline going. This week in blogging, of course, the economy is the big story. Things are in meltdown everywhere. And I think this is a fascinating time for a right-left discussion because I have a feeling the lines are going to blur all over the place here.
I agree, indeed.
It really is. So, Bill, what's the mood on the right side? Who's making good points? Who should we be reading? What are they saying out there?
Well, I think what's happening on the right-hand side is, to some extent, and I find myself saying this a lot sometimes when I'm talking with Bill about on his subjects he brings, that there is not as much discussion on the right as the left, because I think there is some nervousness on the right about, what has happened. And I live along a major road in D.C., so there may be more than one siren coming through tonight. I think there is some, that nobody wants to defend the Bush administration. Certainly what's happened with and that's in general, but in the specific where the Fed has stepped in, it has essentially bought AIG, and that's not something that free market conservatives are especially happy about. John McCain is in the past has been better on issues. Has been better on, say, Fannie and Freddie, but he's started to strike more populist notes, to put it kindly, in the past few days. And it's kind of reminded conservatives what they didn't like about John McCain. And, so let me read a couple of quotes to illustrate conservatives' discontent with McCain, which seems to be back a little bit after a few weeks of a Palin, they like Palin better than McCain, but she made him look better. So here's Ramesh Ponnuru at the corner. So Ramesh writes, Senator McCain's embrace of regulation as the answer to Wall Street's ills is vacuous. He isn't telling us what rules he would put in place, let alone how those rules would have helped in the past or would in the future. He is so far getting away with it because journalists treat regulation in the same contentless way. In practice, and this I think is a great point about McCain's past, he has not in practice shown anything close to a generalized hostility to regulation. He has shown a penchant for regulation, often inspired by moralism. He has taken a leading role in promoting regulation of airlines, HMOs, campaign finance, stock options, and boxing, to which I would add tobacco as well. And I'll also read a little bit from Dean Barnett at the Weekly Standard, who mocks McCain's idea of starting a new commission to review what happened. Not dissimilar in a way from Obama kind of ridiculing the same notion. So Barnett writes, McCain has suggested that we form the equivalent of a 9/11 commission to inquire into how this mess came about. Big hint to any future commissioners, it happened primarily because we have a free market economy. I like this idea a little better than the commercial, and McCain has the commercial, which is striking some of these same populist notes. Because it's a theoretical possibility that the commission could conclude that in a free market economy, stuff happens. So I think that's a pretty good summation of what people are saying on the right.
Boy, it's a tough time to be a conservative right now.
It's been a tough time to be a conservative for the past couple of years, I think. Maybe not quite as hard as it was to be a liberal in the first year or two after 9/11, but after having friends tell me around that time, boy, you Republicans sure have it great. Everything's going your way right now. Well, what goes around comes around, and yes, it is a little bit harder. And I think there's also some frustration, of course, that by bailing out AIG, the the Republican elected officials are not actually following through on small government philosophy, small government governance,
right.
Whatever the best term here is.
And I'm going to look forward.
We knew that.
Right. I'm going to look forward to getting into that a little bit later on.
Sure.
Right now, I'll give a little bit of the view on the left side. As you can imagine, there is a fair amount of gloating. We told you so. We told you so. We told you so.
No surprise.
And
I don't think they're right. But I'm not surprised that that's going on.
I'll start off with Bondad. Bondad.blogspot.com, who is calling this, who has a commentary on a Wall Street Journal article, calling this the worst crisis since the Depression. And Bondad points out that for the longest time there were all sorts of juicy rationalizations going on. It was contained to the subprime. Most people were paying their mortgages, so everything was okay. It was a few bad apples in the bunch, which is a really favorite one we hear from you guys a lot. It's never a systemic or structural problem. There's just a few bad apples. Everything outside of the financial sector was doing well. There were many more. But the problem, as correctly seen primarily by the blogs, was simple. The U.S. went on a debt acquisition spree, the likes of which we haven't seen for a really long time. But all of that debt has to go somewhere. As a result, everybody owns a little piece of this problem. And he quotes the Wall Street Journal as saying, "The U.S. financial system resembles a patient in intensive care. The body is trying to fight off a disease that is spreading, and as it does so, the body convulses, settles for a time, and then convulses again. The illness seems to be overwhelming the self-healing tendencies of markets. The doctors in charge are resorting to ever more invasive treatment and are now experimenting with remedies that have never been seen before." Fed Chairman Bernanke and Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson, walking into a hastily arranged meeting with congressional leaders Tuesday night to brief them on the government's unprecedented rescue of AIG, looked like exhausted surgeons delivering grim news to the family. And Bondad continues, "Who would have thought a year ago that the U.S. would now basically be the biggest shareholder in AIG Insurance? It is a shocker. It is a shocker." On the other hand, we have EconoSpeak at blogspot.com, who explains to us in really simple, clear terms, I think, why AIG has to be bailed out. He says, maybe she says, I don't know if this is a male or female blogger, "Suppose somebody wants to make a bet with me that the San Francisco 49ers will win the next 2 Super Bowls. He gives me $100 today, and I have to give him $100 million in case he's right. The chances of this happening are very small, but just in case the impossible happens, I want some backup. I buy insurance from my next-door neighbor. I offer to give him a nickel every week in return for his promise to cover my bet. My neighbor sees that he has a good thing going, getting money for nothing. After a while, he takes on more and more bets until others follow in his footsteps. Soon a market develops. In effect, people can bet on bets. Eventually, the total potential amount of money builds up into the billions and trillions of dollars. Unexpectedly, the San Francisco 49ers win 2 Super Bowls in a row. My neighbor does not have the $100 million on hand to cover my loss. The nickels I've been giving him have been wasted, and I don't have $100 million either. Suddenly, everybody in the market is worried about people's ability to back up their bets. The Federal Reserve steps in and takes over the market. The free world is saved. Huzzah.
I love the description overall. It's a great description for a lay reader like me.
It puts it real.
Although the end is a little glib, don't you think?
It is a little glib. The free world is saved. That remains to be seen. My own bias. I'm a futurist by training, which means I tend to look at things from a 5 to 50 year time horizon, and very systemically. And I would tend to agree with the first assessment, the Wall Street Journal assessment, which is what you got here is a patient in long-term distress. And we are going to continue to see these convulsions for a long while because we are undergoing a real transformative shift in the way the economy works and what it's based on. That's my sense of where things are going here.
Well, in a way, I'm not sure I disagree. I would like to disagree, although I'm a little worried that what we are seeing, and AIG looks like it might be, could be the forerunner of more to come. And there's a much better word for that, but I can't think of it right now. Actually, let me make the same point. Let me back up and say there's a phrase I've seen a lot around the blogosphere the last couple days, on the left and the right, and it is not one that is used. It's a phrase that is a term of derision, and that is privatized profits and socialized risk.
Right, it's one that we've been using on the left for a very long time.
And, I'm seeing it used in pretty much the same way on the left and the right. And it's an issue on which I think, at least in the abstract, conservative-minded or libertarian-minded economic thinkers, broadly call them conservatives, and liberals can generally agree is that, you shouldn't be privatizing profit and socializing risk. Obviously, there's a lot of different factors where sometimes the profits get socialized. I think Fannie and Freddie is a case like that, where there's not always agreement on those things. But I've noticed that, certainly in Washington, it seems that the privatized profits, socialized risk seems to be almost a bipartisan consensus. And we have this case where bloggers who are on the outside, on the left and right, kind of agree more on this point with themselves more than the people who are in power of their own parties.
Well, this brings us down to the question of whether or not bailing out AIG was a good thing, and when should a government bail out a company and when should it step back. I think the consensus on our side, and I think on yours, like I said, the lines are really blurring here between what left and right thinks.
They are.
It's not at all clear cut. But there are a lot of good arguments for having let Lehman Brothers go. I mean, if you believe in the free market, you believe that the companies should be allowed to fail, that the bad wood will out. And that's the natural ecology of business is such that big firms like that do go under, and those who invest in them are taking that risk, and we should let them go. And AIG is a little bit of a different case because it was underwriting basically every part of our lives. And so if you let AIG go, you were dooming every bank, every credit card company, every holder of a car lien. There was so much of the economy that was propped up on it that we could not afford to let it fail. And so I understand the decision that was taken there, and I think I probably agree that in the long term it was a good thing. On the other hand, there's the question about how do we let this thing get so big and so risky. And that is, of course, here on the left where we're looking at that. And as we looked at similar kinds of things that happened in the early 30s and saying this is where better regulation and oversight would have been a good thing, that there was a shadow economy that was allowed to form with the hedge funds and the derivatives and all these things that were going on that AIG was also deeply invested in, that weakened it. And it was like 20% of the investment economy had just sort of gone into this completely unregulated space, and that's the part that is now failing. So that is an argument that on our side we're seeing that as an argument for re-regulation. This is why FDR stepped in and re-regulated things in 1933, and this could justify another round of that. I'm sure you don't agree.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly am not an expert. I took an econ class in college because journalists are required to. Frankly, we should have been required to take more than we were, and so I can speak broadly, I suppose, in the sense that I'm not sure that I'm not sure what the definition of too big to fail is. As you say about things getting blurry. At what point does something become too big to fail?
And what is our obligation when it is? When we recognize that something like AIG has become in effect a public utility almost, in the sense that it was underwriting everything that we did, when we how do we recognize that, and how do we respond appropriately? I think these are very good questions. Before something like this happens,
I guess I would tend to think that socializing the company is not the only way to deal with the negative effects that might happen.
What else would you have done?
Obviously, that's the easiest. That seems like it would be the easiest one, right? That's where you just take over the company, fire everybody, and start running it. And I think the reason I said that I'm afraid that you may be right is that we may be headed into a future where we have more companies that are being nationalized, essentially. There was a Matt Iglesias post the other day. It was called "The Commanding Heights," where he was sort of bemused, and I think I'm using that word correctly, according to previous blogging heads discussions. That's Lenin's term about letting capitalism happen at the smaller levels, maybe, but the soaring heights, the commanding heights of the economy would be nationalized. Obviously, we're not talking about nationalizing Microsoft, although it was once tried to be broken up. But I mean, I think that it's very possible that this is, a harbinger. That's the word I was looking for earlier.
We have to look at what the alternatives were, though. According to, I'm trying to find I read 15,000 blogs today getting ready for this. I'm trying to find the one. According to one blog that I read, the alternative basically was to let the Chinese come in and take it over. Or somebody else with very, very deep pockets. And so part of the choice that the government was looking at was, do we keep this in American hands, or do we end up selling this essential part of our economy to someone overseas? And this becomes a sovereignty issue. When you're dealing with something as big as...
Do you think it would have been a bad idea to sell it to China?
I think it would have been a bad idea to sell it to China. I think there are some things we don't want to have in foreign hands. And perhaps the insurance...
I might say the same of steel production, in case you need to actually go to war and build some tanks.
Right.
Right. But China already is, their economy is very intertwined with ours. And maybe I'm a little naive here, but I would not be as upset with China buying AIG if that's what they want. As long as obviously, if this is the government is buying it, that does make, if the Chinese government is buying it, that does make me nervous.
Right. Like I said, there's a sovereignty issue here, or at least potentially.
I suppose there is, sure.
And so that on that front, I think it may have been the right thing to do. The next question is, what should the government do to prevent this kind of thing from happening again in the future?
And maybe my answer is, and obviously AIG is one issue that we're discussing here, but there are others. There's Lehman Brothers and Merrill Lynch, and I have to say, in the general thing to do is to go ahead and let the banks fail.
Right.
And if you need to set up I've seen Paul Volcker and a few other economists arguing in the past few weeks that there should, or maybe even just a couple of days, that there should be a trust resolution corporation set up to deal with the individuals who it's kind of nobody wants grandma's pension to get lost.
Exactly.
And
or
even as
their brother's mortgage,
libertarian that wants as little safety net as possible, there are times where it just becomes politically impossible to take that line. And I think that this, better than propping up a failed company is to, deal with the harm at the lower level and let the economy sort out, the higher end of it.
All right. Wow, you sound almost like a leftist. Saying that the government has a role in protecting the
I was once an anarcho-capitalist in college, and since then I've come back. It was maybe a couple months. Some people become communists. I became an anarcho-capitalist.
And my true confession is I cast my first vote for Jerry Ford. So.
Oh wow.
We all have our secrets.
So I tend my politics tend to be libertarian right, but I also. I'm a pragmatist too. I look at ideology more like I look at policy like a checklist. If it meets most of my libertarian leanings, then I'm probably for it. I don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And if the alternative is for the government to bail out this company, which should have failed because it was not doing its job, or to deal with some of the after effects and let the company go, I'd rather set up that trust corporation.
One of the things that I'm kind of hearing this in what you're saying is you were saying earlier that conservatives are kind of rethinking a lot of their beliefs here, or at least a lot of conservatives are, and realizing.
No, I didn't mean to say that.
No?
I say the conservatives are
I think they're rethinking
upset that the Bush administration
So you think
didn't follow?
This is a Bush administration problem. They weren't pure enough capitalists, as opposed to a larger systemic problem with unfettered free market capitalism.
I don't think that unfettered free market capitalism is the problem, to put it mildly. I think it's the combination of, to go back to that term before, the socialized risk.
And yet you say and yet you say that the government has a role in stepping in and cleaning up the messes. So it's not allowed to intervene beforehand to prevent the messes, but it gets to come in and clean up the messes after.
The difference is the government wouldn't be protecting the owners of AIG. It'd be protecting the people who needed to make their car loans. Those people they assume some risk, of course, when they go into any market. And I tend to believe in, moral hazard is an economic term that you...
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
If you give a safety net.
Yeah, if you're getting a big enough safety net, then you do. And it's not just for the people who are taking out the loans, it's for the people who are granting them. Because you can go in and you can commit all kinds of mayhem knowing that when things run ashore, that the government's going to bail you out and make it all right. Mommy's going to kiss your boo-boo and make it better. And
all right, and the problem is when people think that they can do that, then we have more and more of these situations.
Well,
so I'm worried
which
that
is why we need to
like
regulate.
AIG will just lead to more of that.
And so, my teenagers don't love the rules that I put on them. They grouse and whine and moan, and corporations do the same thing. But, sometimes a mom's just got to say, sweetheart, I know it looks like fun, but really, really, I can't let you juggle chainsaws. And I think we are at that point, perhaps, with some of the financial institutions, where we have a responsibility. If we're going to be the ones who are going to be stitching up the mess afterward, we can't let them juggle chainsaws. And I think
but why are we stitching up the mess?
What?
Why don't we let them fail the way we would let,
Because people get hurt.
Lots of other companies
people get hurt. As you just said, people get hurt. And we can't allow that.
But, to a large extent, but...
And if I'm going to be the one paying the hospital bills when my kids juggle chainsaws, I'm going to be the one to make the rule that says, honey, don't do that. So
I'm saying that people who make the big risks at the top of AIG, they're the ones who I would not be bailing out. The people who have to make a car payment, I can see there being...
So let the shareholders tank and... Although shareholders... customers are one thing, shareholders another. Okay.
Shareholders, if they have to take it on the chin, they take it on the chin.
But
they put their money into the...
The shareholders of these organizations are also things like very large pension funds. So there's Grandma's money, too.
Mm-hmm.
What about that?
Sure. Risk is definitely the flip side of the great wealth we enjoy in this country because in the entire Western world, really.
And you hope that people administering CalPERS are fairly sophisticated investors. One would think. Big pension funds.
One would think so. Yes.
Yes.
But if they invested in AIG, which I suppose they probably have, this is why you diversify your risk, because you can't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
And the eggs of the U.S. economy are not all in AIG's basket. I wouldn't obviously AIG is very important, and it does have its tentacles reaching far into U.S. and international economies. But I would almost rather see like a mini meltdown and have it be a lesson to the capitalists to manage your money a little better, because we're not going to come save you every time.
No, you said mini meltdown. This brings me to another question. Where does the economy go from here? What's next? We're hearing that WAMU may be the next thing to go, that HSBC is probably right after that. So this is looking like a cascade, and there's nobody in America who's not going to be touched. So I don't know how many this meltdown is. It's sounding pretty maxy to me.
I don't know. I have definitely heard that about Washington Mutual. I hadn't heard that about HSBC, though. And as one who's not an economist, I don't have any idea where it goes next. I assume there will be other banks that have to file for Chapter... I would hope that they file for Chapter 11. I'm afraid it sounds more and more like we're socializing the entire financial services industry. And not to overstate it, but it's certainly much more of it will be owned by the government in a year's time than was the case a year ago, and that's.
Do you see this as a structural shift to a social democracy over the long haul?
Well, not being a futurist, I don't want to say that I think that's where it's going. I'm saying it's.
We'd be late to the party.
It's a concern.
Most of Europe has already gone that way, and a lot of very successful democracies in the world have already taken that step, and America's a good 20 years behind, including where I live. I'm coming to you live from Vancouver, BC, which is the great frozen socialist paradise to the north. It's nice up here. How do you think...
socialism works very well in homogenous countries. In very racially diverse countries, that doesn't work so well, actually.
Let me tell you about my city of Vancouver, BC. 3 million people.
Oh, yes.
750,000 Chinese, 250,000 Punjabi, 250,000 American expats, people from every corner of the world. We are the most racially diverse city in North America.
And Toronto is pretty diverse, too, as well.
Yeah. Canada accepts more immigrants.
Still the Great White North, though, is it not?
It is still the Great White North. But Canada accepts more immigrants than any other country on Earth right now. Just as straight numbers.
I'm aware. Oh, yeah. I've had friends who wanted to get U.S. citizenships and actually ended up getting a Canadian citizenship.
So we are wildly diverse.
It was easier.
So the glib claim that it only works in social democracy only works in homogenous societies, I think, is disproved by at least by our experience up here.
All right. It's something I read a good while ago, and seems to kind of make some sense. I can't back it up any further than that. Certainly, we're at socialism. Everybody in Sweden seems to get along with it, and and not that I don't know. I probably can't get into a long. 4 or 5 years ago, I was reading much more economics than I am now. So it probably is not my best idea to get into a long debate about the various, the actual systems of a government in practice. But the kind of wealth that we have in the U.S. is generated by people being able to spend their money the way that they choose to, and this includes people with lots of money, who sometimes make big risks. And I'd rather keep that and allow for some risk than to make everything than to be Canada or Sweden, I suppose.
Well, let's talk for a minute about how this is going to affect the United States' foreign policy. We've taken on this. We've got this massive need to reinvest in infrastructure. We've taken on this fantabulous debt, bailing out AIG and all the other stuff that's going on. We already have a crushing $2 trillion debt for the war in Iraq. And yet we are not manufacturing anything. Our tax base is eroding. People are losing their homes, which is another piece of the tax base. So, how does this, when we're looking around the world, how does our behavior have to change? Because we're carrying this debt and we don't really have much to pay it off with.
I'll admit here you have stumped me on this. I don't have an answer for this one. But I would imagine you do. Would you care to give me your take on where you think it goes?
I suspect that where this is going is that America is going to pull back into itself for a while. We've lost New Orleans. We just lost Galveston. The bills are mounting up, and the things that we need to take care of at home are mounting up. And I think people, they're tired of 7 years of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I think people are getting ready to kind of come home and pull inside and lick our wounds and repair and rebuild our cities.
That will make Pat Buchanan happy.
That'll make what?
I said that will make Pat Buchanan happy.
Yes, it will. Yes, it will. God bless Pat. It's the only thing I ever agreed with him on. But
fair enough.
There comes a time when you have to get your own house in order, and that is part of being a good global citizen. I think the other thing that's going to happen is that we've gotten a real full head of steam, especially through the neocons. Had this idea that our military might made us an unstoppable force in the world, and that we could kind of work our will on anyone. And I think the hubris, there's what the Greeks said about what the gods do to people full of hubris. And I think we're having that moment. And so there's this understanding that we are connected to the world. Again, back to the analogy of teenagers. This whole business of 14-year-olds get very full of themselves, and they say, I'm independent. I have no parents. I need nothing except my own bedroom and my allowance and a ride to the mall. and
right.
They're completely dependent, but they don't want to be. And I think America tends to get that way. We don't realize how much of the goods that we have come from China, how much of the money that underwrites our houses and our cars and all of this stuff comes from China. Our energy comes from the Middle East. We are manifestly dependent on a lot of people for everything we have. And I think part of the shock that's kind of coming is that we're beginning to really get that awareness. And that invincibility that we've had the last 30 years is going to begin to kind of give way a bit. And I think that will probably be good for us, kind of a maturing experience. Having to...
I tend to agree that there is, the pendulum is probably likely to swing back towards a more, self-focused nation.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one can proudly speak of that. Over the next I don't know number of years. I think it's very possible. I don't know that it actually will be the case. I think we do still we do still have, obviously we are fighting wars abroad, and we are still. I don't think we're going to say curtail our participation in global trade. I think
I don't think we will either.
China is going to stay a very important part of our economy.
But I think we're going to be more realistic about what that means to us, about what those relationships mean. And rather than saying they don't exist, I have no parents or I have no relatives, as teenagers
Mm-hmm.
want to do, we're going to say, yes, we're part of this family and we have responsibilities and obligations within this family, and take those a little more seriously. And that
and how do you try? What do you mean for that in terms of the actual policies?
Self-sufficiency.
Getting out of the metaphor for a moment.
Yeah, I think more self-sufficiency. I think we may be a little less inclined to go intervene in the affairs of other countries. I certainly the failure of neoconservative economic policies here is going to make it a lot harder to sell them to other countries when we go in. And
what is a neoconservative economic policy?
Well, the WTO and IMF kind of stuff where they go in and say to small countries and say, yes, we'll loan you the money you need to get out of whatever crisis, but like we do to South Korea and we've done to in various South American countries, we'll get you out.
I could actually call that neoliberal.
I think you're probably right, neoliberal.
Okay. I think a neoconservative generally is a foreign policy outlook and a American greatness conservatism where great countries do great things like go to Mars and invade Iraq.
Do you think invading Iraq was a great thing?
And neocons, I would not characterize myself as a neocon per se, although I agree with some of their foreign policy views. On economic policy, neoconservatives tend to be a little bit more left. Some of them, the original neoconservatives.
Oh, I know. They started out as socialists. It was.
Yeah, and they lost some of it, but not all of it, I suppose.
That idealistic, we're going to go out and change the world, and remake it in our image, kind of thing was, they transferred it from Marxism to far right wing economic agendas. In any event,
well, I do think that our soft power has already transformed the world.
Yes.
That happened over the past century, really.
Really, and America at its best has projected soft power wonderfully. And one of the things I'm reading a wonderful book by Andrew Basovich, who is a conservative professor of military history at Boston University, called The New American Militarism. And his argument is that America is at its best when it projects soft power. And part of what the neoconservatives, and he did say the neoconservatives, brought was this belief that American military force released us from the need to use soft power, and using the military became the first resort instead of the last, and that's part of how we got into where we are. And it's a fascinating book. I recommend it to anyone. It's a short read. And he takes.
I'll just add that that would not be my view that hard power frees us from the need to use soft power. Carrots and sticks, I think will always go together.
Well, I think it's been really discredited, the idea that we can just kind of go into anywhere and take anything we want and make our will manifest through military force. But in terms of domestic policy, well, the other thing about foreign policy, too, is like I said, we can't go into these other countries and tell them that they have to do, to deregulate everything and put it all up for sale to multinational companies, when this has, after all, worked so well for us. I suspect that our credibility on that front has probably been deeply eroded by this.
Well, I don't know. I mean, countries that tend to be... Now, remember, there's a difference between the kind of socialism that we see in Europe and the kind of socialism that, we saw in, India 50 years ago. I believe it's India. I'm going back to my old college economics textbooks here. But, there are a lot of countries that certainly the ones that were, the ones that were more socialist, I suppose, tended to really have, everything be much more inwardly focused. And you still do need, deregulation and global trade, and in order to really have an economy that can grow to large scales and can produce great wealth that we have here and that has been spreading outward around the globe for the past 50 years.
I saw some blog entries. Sorry.
Pardon?
I saw some blog entries today also that were talking
Yes.
about how we got into this mess in part because America has been de-industrializing. We've been the whole economy has become in financial services, services of all kinds, but financial services particularly. And what we were doing was selling each other houses. That was how people were making money was through the housing bubble. And of course,
there is an old economic analogy that economists use to debunk the idea of an economy that doesn't create anything can possibly work.
Right.
And I think it involves everybody doing everybody else's laundry.
Right. Yes.
So,
Kevin Phillips has actually written at some length about this. I think he did his PhD thesis on it. So another conservative.
I wouldn't
Not
necessarily
anymore,
use that phrase for him today, but he's certainly if he's a conservative, he's kind of like Andrew Sullivan. He's sui generis at best, and certainly speaks for himself and nobody else.
Right, but the whole idea that this is Phillips has written in several books that this is what happens in the end stage of large empires is they stop manufacturing, they farm it all out to other countries, which they control by military might, and then back home it all becomes financial services. And that's kind of the beginning of the end because there's a lot of profit taking it by the upper classes, and eventually everything goes flat because it's not sustainable, and you get tulip crazes. Or housing crazes or whatever. And it's all, he's been writing these books now for 25 years and everything is just kind of going the way he said. It's very prescient, I think. So what other broad effects will we see from this meltdown? How is this going to change America?
We talked foreign policy, we've talked domestic policy. I guess we haven't talked, culture. I don't know exactly. You are the futurist here, so if you have another prediction, I'd love to hear it.
Ooh. I haven't given that a lot of thought. I do think we are going to see, like I said, the inward turning, perhaps more focus. I think there might be a value shift coming. Because people we've been very acquisitive. It's been a very consumer society, and as the split between rich and poor has grown, we've really seen a lot of tension, and we've seen that money becomes the determinant of everything. So other values, I think a lot of conservatives would agree with this. All kinds of other values that have to do with the intrinsic value of human beings and of community. A lot of those things got lost in the rush. I have
to say there are certain things, that I can see echoes of what's really more of a traditionalist conservatism,
right? Exactly.
Than the kind of
big emphasis on the common
kind of libertarian
good.
Conservatism that certainly city conservatives like myself represent.
Right.
I would be very interested to see kind of what would happen if the modern left and the more traditionalist right found I don't know. That'd be that. Well, I think I'm not sure that's really very realistic.
I think there's a broad common ground there talking about the common good, because I think one of the things that conservatism, as it's been the last 30 years, insisted is there's no such thing as the common good. Margaret Thatcher said there is no there is no collective. There's only individual individual interests. There's no collective interest. And Reagan subscribed to that, and that's been a recurring theme throughout this whole conservative era. I think people are tired of that. The reason we convene government is for the common good. Provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, all of those things. Right. And if the traditional conservatives, are willing to meet the progressives on that common ground, it could be a very interesting partnership, I think.
I think the common good has been sort of defined over the past, I don't know how long exactly, but for some time now, maybe as, and in the way that I would still tend to think of it, frankly, as the aggregate of all of of everybody pursuing their own happiness.
Right.
That is the common good.
But,
and I'll tell you what, up to 9/11, so that's the point where I guess I draw this line. Before 9/11, and sometime after my anarcho-capitalist phase, I really did think that libertarianism was the way of the future, and I had friends who had been more liberal who were drifting towards libertarianism, and at the time I was a big fan of Francis Fukuyama's The End of History,
right.
And I kind of saw nation-state borders mattering less and less, and then certainly the attacks of 9/11 certainly I mean, I guess that really is the point. And then I think our reaction to them certainly, well, people wanted security more. People felt a lot less safe. And so what we're describing about going, and hey, let's not forget that, AIG, Lehman Brothers, Fannie and Freddie are different, of course. But these things are, sort of, I know they're not the same causes as Enron and WorldCom.
But I think all of those things all of them are collective threats. Katrina was a collective threat. 9/11 was a collective threat. Enron was a collective threat. All of these things came down on us, and we're realizing that we all have a common interest, AIG, in making sure that these things are resolved in a way that serves the greater good. I think those kinds of things coming on in society tend to make people cohere and start looking after their group interest. And I suspect that this may be what comes out of the economic meltdown that we're seeing now. How do you think this affects the election? What do you think this means for John McCain?
Obviously, I would think that in the last, after McCain named Palin, he got a good shot in the arm. The polls briefly reversed, and as Palin mania has died down a little bit, even here on Blogging Heads, I've noticed.
Yes, I think
it
we're
is.
Over her, yes.
Obama is back up a few points, and I think I saw James Carville the other day saying that barring any major changes, this election is over, and I think that's in Obama's favor, of course, and he's referring to the economic meltdown going on. And I always thought that it was more likely that Obama would win. Since the nomination, since McCain chose Palin, I kind of put it back towards even. And even at this moment, I still pretty much put it at even. I'm surprised that. I'm surprised that. Actually, I'm not sure I'm surprised. Obviously, Obama's supporters tend to think of him as the real change candidate, and so the downturn in the economy obviously generally does not favor the incumbent party. However, then there's a piece on the Atlantic Online today about how the tying McCain to Bush hasn't worked, and Obama has, for the most part, not been very specific about. And when I say not specific, I know he's offered lots of specifics and lots of policy papers, but he's failed to articulate a big new direction that he's going in. And I think that it has limited his ability to capitalize, as it were, on the financial meltdown. I think it's not 100%. It's not clear to people that Obama really knows what to do about it, and that may redound on the experience question. And experience and change do seem to still be the two flip sides of the coin, but they've gotten a lot blurry over the past few weeks.
Well, I think in the short term it is good for Obama because it got us the economic meltdown got us not talking about Sarah Palin. People had a belly full of that anyway. I think. I don't know. On the left, certainly we were tired of it. I don't know about you guys, but certainly on our side.
Oh no, we like Palin.
I know, you
very
love
much.
us talking about Sarah Palin, right? Because we're not talking about anything else. And of course, with
right.
No. This was something happened.
I genuinely think Sarah Palin is an inspiring and interesting politician, and as far as reform goes, she would be great for reform of the Republican Party. Which, in all honesty, I think a lot of conservatives like for Palin. It has to do with what she does for the Republican Party, which we do extrapolate to mean good for the country overall. And then you must agree, too, even if maybe not a Democrat, not living in the U.S., but, a healthy two-party system, you want both parties to be healthy. And we can
Actually, I am a
both agree,
Democrat, and I do vote in the U.S., so, yeah.
Oh, okay. We can both agree that the Republican Party has not been all that healthy for the past couple of years.
The whose party? The Republican Party?
Oh, the Republican Party.
Okay, I'm not going to get into Sarah Palin with you, but I think this has been very good for Obama because it did get us off that topic. This was the big cold bucket of water I think that the American electorate needed to start talking about the issues again. And as long as we're talking about issues, we are on Obama's strong turf. because that's really...
So it's a good thing for Democrats.
It is a good thing for Democrats because we want to be having these serious discussions about the future direction of the country. We want to be talking about energy, about economic policy, about the proper uses of the military, about how we rebuild. There are all these things, these pressing issues we need to address, and Obama, I think, has made it very clear at his speech in Denver, which I was at. He made it very clear that he does have some very strong directions he wants to take us that are different from where we've been before. And getting the country talking about that and excited about that, I think as scary as this is, I think people are going to reach for that. And so I think it's very good for Obama.
I guess we will certainly we shall see.
We shall see.
And I can't wait for the debates because I think that they're the last game changer. And this is for the blogosphere. This is the last moment to really influence what's going to happen. Because they do have the media reads blogs. Media will be putting together the questions and and writing the story of how the debates go. I think those are that's the last big set of events that will tip the election, and after that, it's going to be all turnout.
Well, you're giving me a great segue here because Campaign for America's Future has a campaign that's going on right now. We are putting ads in the New York Times, one a week through the end of the election season. And the theme is, give us a great debate worthy of a great nation in trouble. We're talking about specific issues. We will be having debate watching parties at ourfuture.org. You can log in and discuss it. There'll be a lot of progressive celebrities kind of there. The Nation magazine is participating in this. A lot of bloggers are sort of joining on. So we're talking about these specific issues. About the economic meltdown, in fact, was the issue this week, and we planned that a month ago. We can talk about your foresight.
Okay.
Well,
you've given me a moment. I have to make a small plug myself.
Absolutely.
We are during the conventions. We worked with C-SPAN to create their we meaning New Media Strategies, to create their convention hubs where we hosted their video and we kept track of the blog posts and we collected the Twitter feeds of everybody talking about
and we as who?
The conventions.
We need a URL here.
And then that URL would have been dnco8.c-span.org and rnco8.c-span.org. They're both still up, and all the video and all the blogs, everything will stay there. But for we were going to be doing a debate tracker for C-SPAN as well. I would give you the URL, but it hasn't been locked down yet. But we'll be providing video as well, and blog roundup, and Twitter roundup as well. So there we go. We just turned blogging heads into a commercial enterprise.
Hey, we did. Well, that's part of what we got to do here for our enterprises. All right. Well, Bill, it's been great talking to you. I think we should wrap this up now. Say good evening to everybody. Hold on tight to your funds. I think we're in for a wild. We're in for a wild ride.
Indeed.
Okay. Good evening.
All right.
All right.
Good evening.
Bye-bye.
All right.